you. Also
Abi yanına git. Yanına git. Bakayım. Peki. Evet, şimdi kayığımıza bindik. Okyanusa açılıyoruz, doğru mu? Muhammed yemeği kullan bakalım, bak güven sende.
Allah be.
Kaptan Muhammed bin Reis. Kaptan James Cook.
Muhammed bin
James Cook'u biliyorsun değil mi sen? İngiliz kaşif. Bizim de burada şeyi analım. Bence burada tek anacağımız kişi Piri Reis.
Yelkenler alamıyor.
It is the year 1410.
Kaptanınız
Porto
konuşuyor,
was used
dinleyin.
to look by the time of the Portuguese discoveries. People on the caravel, what brings you here? If it's spices and precious stones, you're in the right place. Nowadays, all roads lead to Lisbon. Our beloved King Manuel keeps it in permanent construction. Here, the flagship naval yard was built, one of the most important naval shipyards belonging to the Portuguese Ocean Empire. It was also from here that in 1497 Vasco da Gama departed towards India. To celebrate, the best architects and artists were recruited to build the famous
Arap Yarımadası ilk
just
geldi mi
past
hocam?
By this time, Lisbon was one of the most sumptuous cities in Europe.
Adam kahvesini döküyor ve içiyor.
Today is August 21st, 1415. Within those walls, 20,000 merchants dedicate themselves to the daily trade of spices, tissues, oriental carpets, precious stones and gold from the South Sahara. There is also the main source of cereals and raw materials for the textile industries, such as leather, fur, and clothes. We are therefore at the heart which controls all the trade between the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. When the Portuguese king, John I, carved his spear here in the north of Africa, he made his desire to reconquer the kingdom of Fez very clear. Although it was true that the Portuguese excelled in their knowledge of Muslim lands, and therefore were able to increase their wealth and trade power, they weren't so lucky with their aim of spreading Christian faith, and encountered strong resistance from the highly Islamized African population. Businesses of the sea made Ceuta the starting point of the Portuguese adventure across the world.
Bayrağı taşıdı.
Gene top atışı atabilirler ha, dikkatli ol. Karşıda gözcüm onlar lan, gözcü. Vay namussuzlar, gözcüler var ha.
Canlar burada. Denizler olur. Bak şöyle su falan bize bırak ya.
Geminin içine verdik Muhammed. Ay. Gemi su alıyor.
Çürümüş insan melekleri, iskeletleri.
Geminin içi su alıyor Muhammed.
Bakmayacağız. O gün karaya çıkacağız komutanım.
Evet. Şelaleden geçeceğiz.
Zafer için her yol mübahtır.
Years ago, these far western lands were seen as the end of the world. sailors refused to navigate beyond Cape Bojador. Many adventurers dared to face the Atlantic, but they never came back. Giant snakes were believed to rule the seas, and mythology was full of stories of lands inhabited by faceless men. An immense abyss awaited on the other side. Despite his failed attempts, Henry the Navigator never gave up, and in 1434, his trusty squire, Jill Ames, managed to reach the other side of the cape. Despite his failed attempts, Henry the Navigator never gave up. His trusty squire managed to reach the other side of the cape. It was then, however, that the Tenebris was revealed. There was another terrible
Gemiye girdiğimiz belli olsun.
by Adam Liston, the hideous phantom of unearthly pallor.
Tamam. Evet.
In 1488, Bartolomeo Diaz rounded the Cape of Storms and opened a route to the Indian Ocean. However, 10 years were to pass before the trip that finally enabled the arrival to India. During that time, Portuguese discoverers explored the coast and the inland of Africa. They encountered people who were much more organised and skilled than they could ever imagined, and saw things that had never been seen before. Throughout that period, in 1494, Portuguese and Spanish kingdoms led the greatest world division in history upon the signature of the Treaty of Tordesillas. This was also a time of huge naval innovations, such as the kits brought from Lisbon, which enabled the construction of a new ship in just 12 days. The square-rigged caravel appeared, allowing for a much greater military control. The Portuguese prepared to take Europe beyond the Mediterranean. Let us continue this adventure into the forest.
Bir var bende. Bana kalksan falan var mıydı?
Aa, evet, bana kalksan var.
We are in the rainforests, thus entering the unknown. These inland waterways were used by the Portuguese discoverers for organising expeditions to find slaves and precious metals. These rivers also allowed for the movement of missionaries, settlers and merchants. It took just a few years for explorers to find a never-before-seen beast, as strong as a cow, with a snout similar to a horse and the teeth of a boar. It had 4 legs, but as it spent most of its time in the water, it was first called a fish. Later on it was identified as a mammal and named the hippopotamus. the amazing fauna of the planet began to be known. Flying fish, zebras, armadillos, sloths, penguins and rhinoceros were absolute novelties, as well as reptiles, monkeys, colourful birds, and different-sized but equally dangerous felines. Due to the discoveries, humankind became more aware of this biodiversity, and most of these animals travelled the world in all directions. Several new plants were discovered, and many of them were transplanted to other continents, changing landscapes and ecosystems. Tobacco consumption soon spread in Asia and Europe. Potatoes and beans contributed largely to the agrarian revolution in England during the 17th century, which led soon afterwards to the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century. Sugar also became an Atlantic product. From Europe, fruit trees, vegetables and cereals crossed the ocean, which allowed for the development of colonial societies. These were profitable times.
Hindistan gidiyor hocam. Anladın orayı kopa.
Muhammed düz otur oğlum, düz otur. Yamuluyor.
Ben gördüm mü? Hocam.
Hindistan'a geldik.
Hindistan'a geldik.
Can you smell the cinnamon and the nutmeg? We have finally arrived in India. This is May of the year 1498, and we are in the city of Calicut. Here, Portuguese discoverers found the source of pepper, ginger, cinnamon and clove, but they also found that the Moors controlled its trade. The arrival of the Portuguese Armada was made possible by one of the bravest men in this adventure, Vasco da Gama. There you find him, at your left, eager to negotiate with the samurai of Calicut. In India, explorers were dazzled by gold, pearls and diamonds. A story was told of a sailing king who possessed the most famous ruby ever seen in the world. It was so huge that it was a foot long and the thickness of a fat man. But what did the Portuguese leave in India? In Goa, they created the first Portuguese city and there produced coins, built naval shipyards and set up the first munitions factory. Secondary and university education were made possible, typography was introduced, and at the same time, the foundations of modern pharmacology were set. Kalpataru is a magic tree that, according to Indian beliefs, grants all wishes. Dare to flip a coin and make your wish.
Bir tane çalıyor.
It was in 1515 that the Portuguese arrived in Timor, originally called Timur, which means east. At the very beginning, they carried the abundant sandalwood, highly sought in Europe for the manufacture of luxury furniture and perfumes. In the 17th century, after losing the Moluccas and the Malacca, and expelled by the Dutch from the Sulawesi island, Portuguese explorers returned to Timor and found a Portuguese community. Timor then became the basis of their activities. The first contacts with China were not successful. For some time, Portuguese discoverers were forced to smuggle valuable Chinese porcelains and silks from Malacca. But the time came when they were able to take advantage of the unfriendly relationship between Japan and China by offering their services as intermediaries. The demand for Chinese silk was so high and the potential for trade was so strong that the Mandarins did not hesitate to establish commercial agreements with the Portuguese. Trade with Japan then became protected by well-equipped government ships, and maritime piracy almost disappeared. As a reward, by 1553 the Portuguese kingdom was granted the everlasting lease of Macau. Through Macau, new goods were introduced in China. Portuguese traditional samosas led to the Chinese pancake. They also introduced sweet potato in the Chinese metropolis, which became the main food in the Guangdong province. From China, the Portuguese brought tea, which was later introduced in England by Catherine of Bragança when she married Charles II.
Atenção! O World of Discoveries informa que os barcos se encontram momentaneamente parados para embarque e desembarque de visitantes com mobilidade reduzida. Agradecemos a vossa compreensão. Obrigado.
Herkesin gibi durdu ya. Sen silah satayım mı size topak parasını yapayım.
In April 1500, the Armada headed by Pedro Álvares Cabral found the land of Vera Cruz. Pero Vaz da Caminha registered that amazing moment when two strange worlds communicated for the first time. They are brown-skinned, of quite a reddish complexion, with handsome faces and noses. They stand naked, with no clothing. No resistance was offered, and they presented us with ivory, precious stones and gold. Not even the Catholic liturgical rites scared them. Soon, this land became known as Brazil, since there were many trees with reddish-brown trunk that seemed to be burning. In Portuguese, this is described by the word brasa, which means on fire. Although the attention focused on India, it was only after 1534 that King John III started to pay attention to the settlement in the Brazilian territory and to the development of sugar and mining industries. Sugarcane was grown and sugar mills were built in all captainships, from São Vicente to Pernambuco. But let us go back to the letter sent to the King of Portugal, and to the true intention of the Portuguese adventure in these lands, the search for gold and other mineral wealth. For many years, expeditions were sent into the woods to search for metals and precious stones, but with no success. The first significant discoveries happened in the late 16th century. With the discovery of gold and diamond mines, thousands of Portuguese migrated to Brazil, and Portuguese became the national language. This monument, next to the Golden Sands, signals to winds and skies and others that will pass by the Portuguese legacy. And the shields whisper to the unending ocean that the boundless sea is Portuguese. It is time to depart. Don't forget your belongings, and let this be the starting point of a new journey of discovery throughout the wealth and delicacies of our amazing shop and themed restaurant. Welcome to the place where history gets a new life.